So it won't be long, time's going to be coming up where your fingertips, your tips of your toes, they're going to be biting at you here real soon. It's a good lesson for us to think about because that sharp warning that nature gives you when it comes to those fingertips and toes, in the wilderness, comfort's a choice that you earn. My elders used to say, fire isn't just heat, it can be judgment. So it measures your patience, your preparedness, your preparation, so to speak. Are you prepared? Your respect for those elements, obviously. You miss one of those steps, and the wilderness is going to remind you of your mistakes. It's going to remind you how small you really are. You ever notice how we go out on the patio and light a fire just because we like sitting around it, right? We don't do it just to stay warm. We build it a lot of times, I think, because we want to prove that we belong to something. We feel something from that fire. And I think back thousands of years ago, and I think to myself, can you imagine the first people that learned how to control this fire? They came across something, they ran from it for who knows how long, and someone finally uses ingenuity enough to say, you remember that last time we came across that animal that was burned up and it actually tasted a whole lot better, was a whole lot easier for us to eat, and a number of different things. If we could just figure out how to get a hold of this fire, that would be awesome, right? Every coal is a breath. Every wisp of smoke is a conversation between man and the earth, between our will and the weather. We're going to make sure it's done the way it's always been done, from the ground up, not from a match. Although, if you're in a survival situation and that's all you've got, that's the thing to use first anyway. But we're going to use it from a level of understanding, because out in the wilderness, when everything depends on that one spark, you're not really just building a fire. You become the fire. Primitive humans and fire. A lot of people thought that was magic, right? It just happened. Again, they probably fled from fire for thousands of years. And then after their fear was subsided, they began to respect it. And they eventually developed such an innate curiosity to control it that they found a way to make it work. It took a long time. And so the methods we have today are thousands of years old. And they are to be respected, obviously. Today, we still have that well-founded attraction to fire. Like I said earlier, it's either the weekend patio, staring at the flames affects us. It changes us somehow. It makes us yearn for something. And I think it's changing our inner self to some degree. There are definitely certain times where we can live without fire. But in some cases, it is critical in preventing hypothermia, in sterilizing water or cooking. So let's start with some precautions first. We always like to start with the hazards. And when it comes to site selection, that's the number one thing I always want to teach people. Typically, you're going to be in an area where you might have plenty of material because hopefully your shelter's right there, right? So if you've built your shelter there, you should have plenty of materials available. So if you've got that material nearby, the next thing to look for is the distance to your debris hut. You obviously don't want to be a foot or two away. What is your debris hut? Your debris hut is a tinder bundle. It's a giant tinder bundle. You're going to be planning on sleeping in it. So let's not pick a site to put that fire so close to that you've lost all protection, basically, from that. So we're going to be at least 6 to 10 feet away. And we're going to clear that area, the ground, get it down to as bare ground as possible. No leaves, no sticks, nothing there that's going to actually catch fire and burn. So once we've got that cleared, the next step is we're going to dig a small pit about 6 inches deep. Nothing super deep, maybe 2 feet across, and then it's going to be kind of angled downward on the sides. We want to get it down into the ground enough to preserve heat. It's going to be super self-efficient this way. to some degree. If you can imagine setting your fire up on the ground where the wind can blow across it, what happens when the wind blows on it or you blow on a fire, it accelerates that flame. It accelerates the rate at which it burns. It does increase the heat, obviously, but we're in a conservation mode should we be in a survival situation, right? We don't want to have to go out and get more wood because the wind is keeping it, burning through the wood much quicker. So getting it down below grade, even just a little bit, is going to help conserve those coals, make that fire last longer, and conserve your own energy. So now that we've got the pit dug, we've taken that dirt, we've kind of pushed it to the far side of the fire, and it's starting to act as a little bit of a windbreak. We want to build that. It's not really a windbreak, it's a reflector wall of some sort. Now you can make that reflector wall out of lots of different things. Obviously, the dirt you dug up is going to be starting that, but you're going to use those rocks. If they're nearby, you're going to use wet, super wet lumber. If you want to, move it a little further away from the fire and build that up about 30 inches. Now, the pit itself, when you dug that, is a good idea, especially if you've hit roots, to go ahead and use some of those rocks to line that bed of that pit with. That will keep the fire from catching those roots on fire and going back towards a tree, which can actually happen quite a bit. So those are the cautions that we want to really think about. Is we have a fire and we accidentally put really sparky wood down inside there, and it's a little bit windy. I need to know that I'm keeping my distance from all the things that could catch on fire and create a problem. So now we've got our fire pit, we got our reflector wall up about 30 inches, and it's in a horseshoe shape. It's coming around pretty much 60% of that fire circle. Now it's time to start collecting wood, right? And what are we going to look for wood? We're going to look up. We need dry wood. Dry wood's the key to starting a fire. Any wood that's on the ground is going to have a certain level of moisture in it that's just going to be too much. So we want to avoid any wood that's on the ground unless we're using that for our reflector wall. We can use it for other things. We could use it for, our debris hut. Hopefully we're not building our debris hut out of primo wood. And so this process of building your shelter is obviously going to give you a real good idea of what area to look for the dry wood in. And you're going to be probably noticing that as you're building that shelter. So off the ground could be dead limbs. It could be even laying on the ground, but yet some of the limbs are way up off the ground. So you can definitely collect from that as long as it's a long ways away from the ground. All right, so we're ready to build our fire. If you're in a survival situation, and even if it's just more of a campground setting, one of the easiest fires to start is a teepee fire. And so we're going to start collecting the wood for a teepee fire, and we're going to basically graduate from very small all the way up to larger. Okay, we're not going to get too large though, because getting too big is kind of a waste of time. So we're going to start with some the smallest starter for our fire, which is basically what we call a tinder bundle. Now, a tinder bundle can be made with a number of different things. It can be made with grasses. It can be made with leaves, dried moss, things like that. That's really kind of the primary stuff we want to start making that with. But there are some other really kind of ingredients that I think are unique for tinder bundles. Inner bark is one of those. So if we had a standing dead tree that we were able to pull the bark off of, there might be some inner bark where the cambium meets the bark itself. And those are really good to make bird's nests out of. Basically, ultimately, we kind of strip it up and buff it a little bit. And a couple of cautions though, cedar and oak and walnut are not usually the best. You'll probably have to mix something else with those three should you be using that, because they can be a little bit coarse, so they don't catch fire quite as easy as some of the other ones. Say like elm, that's really good. Cottonwood's awesome, really good. Ash is also pretty good, but again, these are standing trees. They're dead already. And there's a couple other things that you might want to incorporate in that, and one of those is cattails. If you're the right time of year, you're in the fall or later into winter, The cattail head has a kind of a pillowy, almost like dandelion head, and it's super light and has the ability to light so quickly, but it'll just burn up if you just use that. It'll burn too fast. So take some and maybe take about an inch off of it and incorporate that into the bird's nest, and it'll really help catch that on fire a lot. So one other thing, if it's super wet and you're having a hard time finding dry stuff, if you're familiar with milkweed, that's another one to look at. The milkweed pod has another downy type of material inside of this pretty big capsule. It's kind of a fairly large seed pod, which you could use dandelion heads as well. Thistle as well, when it's dead. Thistle's a really good one. Cotton sedge, if those of you are familiar with that, and dogbane. They all kind of have a seed head that if it's wet, they tend to dry out really quick, and you can use those quite a bit. If you got a whole bunch of it, then you might be able to get a fire started. Some of the woody stalks that are out there are another one that I think are really important to use. And this time of year, right now in the fall, these woody stalks are starting to die off. And pretty soon they'll still be standing. They'll start to lean a little bit, but they'll dry out enough. You can use those. The outer is a lot more dry. The inner pith might be something. So you can break that, basically smash it, split it down the middle, remove the pithier materials, and you got a much drier set of materials. Now, that kind of brings us to how we want to move up from this small amount to this teepee fire. We can use some of these weeds, these woody stalks, and that's really where kindling starts to come in. Now, that kindling is always very small. This is less than a pencil size. So another way to think about kindling is start at the very end of the branch. The very smallest tip of a branch is going to be the size material you're going to want to start with. You're going to build a small teepee with that, maybe about the size of your hand. And then outside of that, we're going to step up beyond that pencil size. That is the small kindling, right? Small kindling is maybe from your pinky size up to your thumb, right? And build a second teepee around that smaller teepee. Now, as you go, you want to leave room for the tinder bundle. So ultimately, it's at that second layer that you might want to throw some sticks in the ground, kind of deep, bury those sticks in the ground, 2 or 3 of them, to stabilize that teepee a little bit. Once it's stable, then you know that when you go to push the tinder bundle, which is probably about the size of a softball or baseball, in through the doorway of the teepee, that you're not knocking everything over. Hopefully that makes sense. Then you're going to go up to bigger than your thumb size, smaller than your wrist size, and that is going to be breakable materials. That's your main fuel size that you want. You don't want fuel sizes, 6 inches around. You can use that, but that's not really the optimum if you're trying to get to boiling some water, cooking some food, things like that. So some smaller ones that you can still break are really ideal fuel to get those things ready. Those will build a really good bed of coals down in your fire pit. Now, absolutely, larger fuel logs can work. Again, that's more for light and heat. Should you want to, need lighter heat and work on some other things, they'll absolutely work for that. Also, it's a log that you can put on, like if you're going to go to bed and you're trying to preserve those coals and not have to start that fire again in the morning. That's the time to put on some of those larger logs. So now you've got all your wood collected, and you want to probably collect twice as much as you're thinking you're going to need. Get it all collected, and now it's time to actually light your fire. We don't want to have to light our fire, get it going, and then head off and get some wood, because again, something could happen. We want to watch that fire. So we want to be nearby. We want to have everything collected and we're ready to go. Now, I hope that you've been listening to some videos. You've prepared yourself enough that you found yourself in a situation, whether that was, out hiking or you became lost somehow. I hope that you prepared a day pack of some sort. And maybe inside that day pack, you've got some matches. Maybe inside that day pack, you've got a lighter, something like that you had in there. In this circumstance, when you're ready to go like that, use the matches, use the lighter. again, if you're in a survival situation, we're wanting to preserve every ounce of energy as much as we possibly can, because if we expend that energy, we have to replace it with something. We have to replace it with water. We have to replace it with food. So if we've got something that's going to make our life super easy, great, use it. Absolutely. Until it's gone. Now, you could think back to Native Americans and you can say, well, see, they had axes that they traded for. They had pots and things that they traded for. They absolutely did. And they used them because it made their life easier. But if they were to lose those or they broke those, they could always fall back on their skills. They still had the ability to do that. So if you've got the matches, great. But don't forget how to do it in case you don't have any of that. Those are much more primitive ways. They're a lot more advanced. We won't talk too much about those. They're available out there for you to learn. I hope to be doing some classes and be teaching some folks. And if that's the case, then I'll actually be recording those and putting those on the YouTube channel as well. So now if you are going to have a lighter or something like that, you don't need to have the tinder bundle outside of the teepee. You can go ahead and put it inside of the teepee fire and just light it from there. You're good to go. Now, should you have something different like flint and steel or a ferro rod, then you keep that tinder bundle outside of that, and you can use the flint and steel, get you the ability to get a spark off of that, lands in the tinder bundle, starts to take flame. You might have to blow on it a little bit. You want it kind of fully engulfed in flames, and then put it inside that teepee fire. So some of the methods, remember the 22 methods, 9 of which are universal, and 3 of which I think are the easiest to learn. The first of which is a bow drill fire. The second is a hand drill fire, and the third is what they call a mouth drill fire. These tools are really good. You can, once you make one bow drill fire, as far as the apparatus that you need, you can get 10, 12 to 20 fires, depending on your fireboard and how big your spindle is. So those, once you have those, you kind of have a kit and the ability to restart. But typically, if we made a fire and we put some logs on it the night before to kind of make it burn as long as possible, the next morning, most likely, you will not have to restart that fire. Brush off the white ash. Be careful. White ash, when it's wet, can burn your skin. So be super careful of white ash. That's a bad one to put your hand down inside of a pit, thinking everything's dry. And we'll talk, there's a lot of other great things that white ash can be used for. But yeah, clean out as much as possible to keep that fire nice and low, and use those remaining coals that are down there, blow on them a little bit. You should be able to just use kindling to relight that fire versus having to come up with another tinder bundle. But I do want you to think about, as you're gathering this wood, that the tinder bundle is probably the easiest material to collect with the lowest amount of energy. So if you're out there collecting dead grass, don't just collect enough for one tinder bundle. Go ahead and collect enough for 2, 3, or 4, right? And then put that material inside your debris hut to keep it dry as possible. Because we ultimately want to be able to not have to spend that energy again. One final thought about collecting firewood is, don't start collecting the firewood right next to where you're at. Find an area. You should be in an area that has a lot of that material available, but go further away, say 100 to 200 feet away, and collect that material first, because you're going to have the most energy then, and you hopefully are injury free then. You want to preserve the firewood that's nearest your shelter for the just in case, the maybe issue, right? The what if problem. What if should always be part of your mental attitude when it comes to survival. So build that emergency cache of things close to you, so that if you do twist an ankle and you can barely walk, you don't have to go nearly as far to keep that fire going, to get that food if necessary, and that kind of thing. So keep those things in mind. Got a lot of other things, a lot of little hints and tricks. If you want to do a video on just the bow drill fire or another apparatus of fire that you've heard about, throw some comments down below. If you like what you heard, please click the like button and subscribe. We'll have some other ones and we can get into some details on some different things. I hope you like the channel and I look forward to seeing you back. Have a great day.